including paradigms, goals, and values. And that's why we are now working with this. How can we fundamentally restructure society? Is that a possible thing to do? At least the government wanted this report, so they are open. So they commissioned this report. That means that they want to know if there are alternatives out there, if there are visions, which is my chapter. Are there visions out there that could actually be an alternative and that folk will appreciate as an alternative to the way of being right now? Can we transform everything? And how can we do it? Can we get more circularity into this system somehow? And can people use the resources in the neighborhood instead of extracting from the rest of the world? So this report is going to be published in May, I think, next year. We will deliver our second draft in November. Therefore, I'm very busy. And it's addressing the underlying causes of biodiversity loss that determines, or it's actually going to find solutions for that, determines of transformative change and options for achieving the 2050 vision for biodiversity set by the CBD, and that's the chapter I'm involved in. Well, whereas Fern is working with the concept of transformative change in her chapter. So what actions are agreed upon? You had this the seminar yesterday. You could do the CBD certificate so that you would know what the Convention of Biological Diversity is. And it should be 6th of June, not 5th of June. I have to recheck it. But so that's, maybe I was wrong here. So, and it was ratified, and ratified means that the countries are accepting it into national governance structures. So it's signed by 150, and then you have these 3 goals. I'm just taking the short version since you probably know already a lot about this convention now from yesterday. So it should be conserve biodiversity, it should promote sustainable use of biological diversity, and you should have a fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilization of biological diversity. And then we come back to this one, which I've shown before, and I will just repeat it. You get the 1992 Rio Summit, and then you have the Agreement on Convention to Conserve Biological Diversity, 1992. Then you have the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety for genetically modifying organisms. It was rather early. In 2002, they started to think maybe we should set some goals for how we are going to halve biodiversity. And then in 2010, they have these targets, ACHI targets. And then you have this 2012 IPBES who will be monitoring the status of biodiversity decline. And just a quick look at the ACHI goal. You see the red here. Here are a lot of targets they wanted to relating to drivers, pressure, status, benefits, and implementation. And you can see that it's red, 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 red on pressures. So they haven't really reached any substantial outcome from the ACHI goals. Not even protected areas they were able to reach. So the ACHI goal was a real failure. So the strategic plan from 2011 to 2020. So now they're trying again with the Kunming-Montreal Agreement. And why has CBD failed to deliver? So there is I brought two simple explanations, but I think I put four there, so I don't know what happened there. But one is the implementation gap. So there is it's not really implemented. Yeah, like you agree to all these goals, but there is no effective mechanisms for implementing it. So people can then choose to ignore it because you haven't really agreed upon how you would implement it. And then you have accountability is lacking. And that is, compared to IPCC, biodiversity has been poorly monitored. So you don't really have systematic monitoring of what is really happening out there and in relation to the targets you set. So you set a target, you have to find a way to monitor it, and if nobody's monitoring it, that you're reaching your targets sufficiently, then politicians cannot work with anything. And then there is a lack of uptake by sectors. Like the governments say they want to do it, but the different sectors are not doing much with biodiversity. They are focusing mostly on CO2 emissions for the time being. And there's no enforcement. So you ratified the CBD and agreed to the ACHI targets, and you agreed to coming Montreal Protocol. But what if you don't do anything about it? There is no sanction possibilities here. So therefore, part A, they could smile and write his name on the biodiversity agreement. So you have this, but this is called like a historical agreement. This is supposed to change the world, I hope. So it's like a Paris Agreement for nature. And here I have borrowed a nice slide from Vigdis Svanvik, who was present on this the conference of the parties, that is the governments who meets in relating to the Convention of the Biological Diversity in the plenary. And they, in the 15th meeting, they agreed upon a common Montreal Agreement, which means at least they have something, and it's more clear than ever. And it's also based on science and and how we are going to monitor targets. So that differs from the ACHI in that sense. So, so you have 4 overall goals you would reach before 2050 for people to live in coexistence with nature. You know, that both nature and people can thrive. And one is about what you want to conserve. The other one is about the activities or drivers you want to avoid or mitigate or reduce. And then why do you want to safeguard this? And the nature contribution is a part of this. And then they have quite a lot of targets relating to act, how you would act to do this. And that's a key, I think, to have some targets that you agree upon how you would act to halt biodiversity decline. If you see here, that's the targets they think about reaching before 2030. It's now 6 years until. So that's very short time. And these are non-time specific, but they should be in place, I guess, before 2050. But you could see here that for the conserve, what they want is to have inclusive spatial planning. In all planning levels, in all sectors, they want to have a philosophy on non-net biodiversity loss. That has to go into all spatial planning, and you have to respect rights of nature and people. And then the second is you are going to restore 30%. It's part of the 30 by 30. You're going to restore 30% of the marine and land areas and freshwater in 6 years. And then you are going to conserve 30%, establish protected areas of 30%. And then you're going to halt human-induced extinction, and that's not maybe so concrete goal. You should stop unsustainable use, harvest, trade of the activities or things that you or species. So there has to be mechanisms in place for that. And by 2030, reduce alien species spread by at least 50%. And then reduce pollution risks by at least 50%. And then reduce climate change impacts is also one of them. And that's where nature-based solution come in. And here is also, we should also measure, in the safeguard part, you should also measure the importance that nature has for people. So, specific targets here is sustainable managed and use wild species, sustainable aquaculture fisheries, restore and enhance nature's goods and services. That's why you also have to figure out what those nature goods and services are. And increase area quality of urban green spaces. And then fair sharing of benefits from genetic resources. So you could say the A there is halt and restore nature. B, use land and seas sustainably. C, share benefits and services. And D, mobilize necessary resources so that we could reach the 2050 vision. I think I said this already how many times. So, yeah, so rights of nature respected, and you could also think about 30 by 30, which goes for both restoration and protected areas. And then there is this slogan of no Paris without Montreal. That's target 8. And what they do there is to couple the biodiversity and climate crisis, so that you say that nature-based solutions, like protecting biodiversity and protecting nature, is also a climate solution, both in terms of reducing CO2 emissions, but also in terms of adapting to climate change and protect yourself against hazards. And it's also important to know that indigenous and local communities are mentioned in 6 of these targets. So they really want it to be bottom up. They want local people to be more involved in halting biodiversity decline. And it's the first time that so much funding is put on the plate, like $200 billion per year. Is the goal, and 30 by 30 again. So that's the goal, to have about 200 billions per year, and 30 by 30 should go to developing countries or economies in transition, you also say. Yeah. So they acknowledge a little, at least a bit, that you have to have fair sharing of resources here, especially since we exploit a lot of the resources elsewhere. And then they put quite a lot of weight on the ACT part in the end, is to recognize transformative change as necessary to solve global environmental crisis. So all of these targets, 14 to 23, is crafted in terms of thinking about the transformation, how you could get this transformation up and going. And they think that setting clear goals for what we want to achieve, then set a number of clear targets, then use science, these should be science-based targets, and they are also there's a guidance note there, so you could go and look more about the details there. But they're also applying the theory of change as a framework for understanding how they think these will transform the world, these different targets. And this, they think, will end up in transforming our policies, economies, and society towards a better, more equitable world for all. At least it's the desire. And when you then think about the theory of change, the theory of change is like you should have a theory about how your policy will work or your actions will work. And in this paper, which I don't have time to go through now, but it's on the reading list. It's maybe a bit tough to read, so I was wondering if we should do something in the seminars with those papers. But here, the different targets have been sorted relating to those direct drivers of loss, the threats that IPBES is said is the main threats, and how they have specific hypotheses of how this will work on these different drivers. So that will be the input, which will influence the threats here, which again will have some outputs in terms of how it influences the ecosystem and the ecosystem integrity, which will then support many of these other targets that I already talked about. Sorry, I'm going a bit fast because and the outcome will be a decrease in ecosystem collapse. So that's maybe the final word, that the theory of change lies behind a lot of the design of this new agreement. And that's a very interesting thing. It's a very special agreement. And the only thing we now need is, of course, that politicians also look at it as a bit special. And that there are some concrete targets there you could work with. Yes, is there any questions to this lecture? Or maybe a bit, lot just me